start with like us trying to recreate the Shining theme music?
Yeah, if you want, I'll probably
Okay.
keep this part in as well.
Bang, 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 bang. I got a little playing music question mark on my Zoom. Set up professional
AJ,
audio.
we're gonna get copyright claimed. My God.
Oh
Anyway, we're here today on the Cult Option Podcast. I'm Richard, and I'm joined by AJ, who just did that
Hello.
flawless impression of the Shining theme song. Because today on Film Franchise Fortnights, specifically two franchise, which is where we're covering
Thank you.
two film franchises, and I don't mean we're only doing two franchises. I mean, we're doing franchises that exclusively have two films in them. And today we are covering...
Doing two franchises would be longer than doing two film franchises.
Yeah.
2-film franchises, not two film franchises.
Today, of course, we are covering Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and... And Stephen King's Doctor Sleep, which is what it's called on the poster and in the film. But it is just called Doctor Sleep. And the first one is just called The Shining. But that's directed by Mike Flanagan, not by Stephen King himself. But they are, of course, both adapted from Stephen King novels, and I'm sure a lot of people will know. And so just sort of at the top, obviously dealing with a film or a franchise like The Shining, but like specifically that first film. We do this, there's a certain thing when we cover films that are like this well known and also this well documented. Like, there's a certain level of pop culture knowledge that we expect people to come to this podcast with. Like,
Sure.
I don't want to be holding your hand through every single thing that everyone knows about The Shinings. Kubrick loved multiple takes. He was abusive to Shelley Duvall on set. Like, there's a lot of these.
Is
sort
that
of
even
things.
true?
Yeah.
I've heard conjecture about that in recent years.
The sort of the conjecture recently is that like it's not like because she had some pretty serious mental health issues later on in her life, and I think people are being like, well, no, it wasn't just a bad year filming The Shining that made her deteriorate later in life, but that was kind of he was so mean to her that she became a recluse and developed all these problems. But he deliberately, to get that scared performance out of her, made it a hostile environment for her. But anyway, these are the kind of things that we're not going to necessarily be dwelling on this podcast. But if this podcast was 3, 5, 10 times the length it is, we'd probably still be scratching the surface about what is out there about The Shining. Because obviously, being based on a book as well, there's a whole other thing there. But yeah, I mean, there's production diaries, there's a bunch of documentaries about the making of The Shining. Other people that know a lot more than us have talked about it. I didn't even actually go to the IMDb page for The Shining. Often we go to look through IMDb trivia, find dumb pieces of trivia, and also, the IMDb trivia also fills out our little talking points. But yeah, I just want to talk about The Shining with my buddy, and I know that you have some stuff you wanted to. Some points you wanted to bring up. I saw in your Letterboxd review.
Oh, yes.
So, I would just love to have a conversation, not just reciting the Wikipedia pages that one reviewer
doing
6 years ago.
Yeah. doing this podcast and doing any kind of movie podcast covering a popular movie. It's this weird thing where it's like, imagine like a cover band for a famous band, like not doing one of the greats, and people being like, no, you've got to like remind me of this thing that I enjoy. That's what it's like for film podcasts doing popular films, right? Because it's like, guys, you didn't mention that maybe The Shining was hiding the moon landing being faked, and it's like, yep, that's one of the old ditties. That's one of the things you can crack out.
Came out 11 years after the moon landing, but Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the movie itself. I think the theory is that Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing, and this film has alludes to that.
Yeah.
I think that specific example. I buy it. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, there's a little section on the Wikipedia page for that. But yeah, so AJ, what is The Shining from 1980 about?
It is about a writer named Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson. Now, it's already getting a little confusing, so just start paying attention there. But Jack...
I actually think of having the same name makes it less confusing.
Ah, interesting.
Because you say, oh, Jack does this, and it's like, yeah, he's...
I think there are arguments for both...
it's one less word I need to know.
So Jack takes his family to this hotel that is entering its winter season, in which it will have no visitors. So it basically just needs a caretaker, and Jack takes with him his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and his son Danny, played by Danny
Boyle.
What's his surname? Danny Boyle plays him. Wow,
Danny Lloyd.
Danny Lloyd. And now I know it's already getting confusing because we've got a Jack playing a Jack and a Danny playing a Danny, but it's going to get a whole lot worse. So they go to this hotel because Jack thinks that he needs the isolation to finish his latest project. They are warned before heading in there that the hotel, which is called the Overlook Hotel, is kind of spooky, and there's been some murders that have happened there, but he's like, no, I don't believe in murders. So he goes there anyway and sort of, I wouldn't say gradually loses his mind, but he loses his mind.
Almost immediately.
His family, his family kind of have to run away from him because he's going to kill them. Yeah. And also Danny has a ability that is called Shining, which is either he can read minds or he can talk to the dead. I'm not 100% sure what the Shining actually is in this case.
Interesting. I always just interpret it as reading minds. I get it. Yeah, it is not 100% clear the exact rules of what the Shining is, and then also Dr. Sleep goes even further into those powers. But yeah, it's funny, I mentioned this.
Does he read minds at all in Dr. Sleep? I feel like in Dr. Sleep it's all talking to ghosts.
Well, they communicate telepathically.
Yeah, okay.
Which is
maybe it's just a general tapping into the
astral,
astral plane.
Yeah. So thank you very much, AJ. But yeah, it's a relatively simple plot for how famously complex the movie is with its themes and the ending as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, a lot of things going on. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I reckon this has got to be one of the most beloved films of all time, right? So in Rotten Tomatoes, I'm gonna guess it's at like 98.
Wrong. You could not be more wrong. It's actually got 83%.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
Yeah, so it famously pretty mixed upon release. At the first ever Razzies, it was nominated for Worst Director and Worst Actress, although in 2022 they rescinded their nomination for Shelley Duvall on the basis of Kubrick's treatment of her. But yeah, it was there was a scene cut from it a week into its release because they needed it trimming down. There's like an extra scene at a hotel at the end that, according to everyone who saw it, the film is better without. But yeah, a week into it, they sent out new reels. And
wow.
Then also when it was like the UK release is 27 minutes shorter, which interesting to note. You watched the American version, which is 2.5 hours long. I watched the European version, which is 2 hours long. Which I didn't realize I was doing, because I googled beforehand how long is The Shining. I saw it in the cinema a couple of weeks ago, and said 2.5 hours, and then it got to an hour and 50 minutes, and I was like, how the fuck? Like, I swear the film ends around this part. Because, but there must be this third act must go on for a lot longer than I remember it happening, and then the film just ended, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But that leads us to the question we always ask at the top of the episode. AJ, had you seen it before, and what do you think of it?
What I love about this question is it's two very different questions hidden in plain sight, but you can then let the other person speak while you take a drink of water or something. But yes, I had seen this before. Big reveal. I'd seen this quite young. I reckon I would have gotten really into horror movies around 12 or 13. And I remember my family showing, like my parents showing me and my brother this movie, because it was, for them, it was like, you know, one of the big ones, which fair enough it is for us too, I guess. But, and I'd seen it. I reckon I'd seen it a couple of times since then, but it had been a while before watching for the podcast. And yeah, I think that there's a good argument that this is like the scariest movie ever made. I think that this is one of these horror movies that is so ambiguous and vague that it kind of like gets to you on a cerebral level. So even like I look at something like The Grudge, which was a movie that terrified me when I was 12, and now I would probably giggle at it if I watched it now.
Yeah.
And I think it's because a movie like that is all just like surface level, like what your undeveloped brain is going to find scary versus what your fully developed masculine brain is going to find scary.
Yeah, my big man brain.
My big man brain. Whereas The Shining is confusing and it's not, as we talked about recently, it's not desperate to explain itself. And because of that, it's a little bit more frustrating than a standard horror movie. And I think that makes a transcendent experience ultimately, because you're left with so many questions. A lot of questions that Dr. Sleep just outright answers in the dialogue. I noticed. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll throw the question back at myself then. And yeah, to answer the have you seen it before question, I similar thing that I grew up knowing this is one of the greats, one of the scariest films of all time. Obviously, very familiar with the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror parody of it, the Shinning, which is, I think, one of the best Treehouse of Horror segments, like just the amount of jokes and also how like faithful a parody it is. But I would have watched this in 2010-ish or something when I was like just getting into film, and probably got it out from Fatso, which was the DVD in the mail service, similar to what Netflix originally was in the States. And
real fans of the show remember the Fatso name drops from over the years. I think
the Fatso films. It's funny. Yeah, I went through a very like Fatso era of films, and it's all like important ones that it's like.
You should make a Letterboxd list.
Yeah, God, if I could remember. It was all of like Paul Thomas Anderson's films. That was the main thing I remember. And
nice.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, I did a big binge of him. And that was before he died as well. But yeah, I watched it and I was dreading watching the quote unquote scariest movie of all time. And so I watched it on like a Sunday afternoon in the middle of the day with like, probably glare covering half the screen to really to take away the film's power to scare me. And I watched it and I was like, I don't think it's that scary. And then I hadn't seen it since until I saw it in the cinema the other night, and I'm a lot more tolerant of horror films nowadays. I can handle them a lot better. I used to just outright refuse to watch any horror films because they scared me too much, even during the life of this podcast. And
totally,
it's totally it's the podcast that has made me able to do them. And now some of my favorite films are horror films. But I will say, I still don't. Its hype as the scariest movie of all time, it doesn't live up to that for me. I get where you're coming from though, and like the thing of just the fact that your brain is working overtime to try and connect all these dots, and it's just like a disorienting film in a lot of ways. Like I'm on board with that, but I I guess for scariest film of all time, to me, it has to be a bit more like cerebrally scary for me. Like yeah.
I remember being like 13 or 14 and not being able to sleep because I kept seeing the shot from the movie with the guy in the dog suit giving the rich dude a blowjob.
Yeah.
Like, I kept seeing that in my mind, and it's just so confusing and depraved and weird
And
that, like, that's kind of... Yeah. That's kind of, like, an example of, like, the... what I mean when I say, like, it gets into my brain, and I don't know why I find that so alarming. And I think, like, something that's always scared me is people, like...
Getting blowjobs.
Like, mouthing... No, this is a different thing. People like mouth agape, like screaming in horror and stuff,
like
and
the
there's
end
a lot of that.
Sleepaway Camp.
Totally, yeah, and there's a lot of that and especially from the kid, Danny Lloyd the kid, but Danny Torrance the character. Sorry, I know that's incredibly confusing. And
if you just said Danny, I would have known.
All of this being said, Okay, here's a fun journey I went on watching it this time, right? When I was a little kid, when I was maybe like 6 or 7, my dad was taking us on a road trip, and he told us like a spooky story that he just made up to try and like pass the time and freak me and my brother out. And in it, he lifted the red rum palindrome from The Shining, a movie me and my brother had not seen. And
it's not a palindrome.
My father was like, "What is it? It's a..."
Well, technically, it's a Simorna lap. It's just the word murder backwards. But yeah,
is that not a palindromic?
Palindrome is when it's the same word forwards and backwards. Murder and red rum,
you're right,
quite famously, are two different words. But
you're right.
It's sort of a joke term, but it is technically what it's called, is Simorna lap, which is palindrome backwards, which is a word that is a different word but still a word backwards.
Right. Well, there you go. Anyway, he lifted that, and we thought he was this terrifying horror genius who had worked out that red rum is murder backwards. And then saw The Shining later in life. But then watching it this time, I was like, is this kind of the lamest thing in this movie?
Yeah.
Like, for a movie for a movie that has so many, like, strange and, like, cosmic horror ideas just, like, running through its veins, it also has just this, like, and red rum, a word that has no meaning beyond a character saying it, spells murder in the mirror. And it's like, oh, okay. All that being said, when the scene happens where Danny gets out of bed and writes it on the door in lipstick and his voice like changes, I was like, this is fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
I thought
little kids are scary.
And
little kids in horror movies are scary.
Yeah. It's just so well filmed. And I went into, like, I was going, like, into this film being like, I'm going to give my Letterboxd review. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to say red rum is cringe. You know, I don't think it's that scary anymore. And then that scene happened, and I felt Richard compelled to change my joke review because I found that scene so well made.
Wow, look at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, you just, when you're talking there, reminded me of something I'd forgotten about, but at the screening I went to the other week of this film, the woman, like, you go to a screening of a film like The Shining, you expect people, you know, you're probably not seeing it for the first time. If they are, it's The Shining. People, you know the general vibe and everything of the film. The chick sitting behind me, I think, had not only not seen The Shining before, but had never consumed any pop culture before. And she was so funny to listen to. Like, when he starts getting angry, she was like, huh? Like, what? Like, didn't know that he was going to have this descent into madness. And red rum was like, just so like, huh, what? And like cracking up at it as well. But yeah, the blowjob scene of just like this very quick shot, which people might recognize also from The Kill, the 30 Seconds to Mars music video, which is a big play on The Shining. She fucking cracked up at that. And was just like, what the hell? And it's so funny that, yeah, just this must have been an insane experience for her.
That's awesome.
But
so funny.
it is like, the differences in the film, and like I will admit, you know, having maybe only seen the 27-minute shorter cut, I haven't got a list of like all the stuff that was cut, because it's just I don't want to just go through a list of like this scene is 3 seconds shorter and blah 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 blah, because it's a lot of cuts like that. There's a lot of just scenes that are shorter and stuff like that. Like the interview, I think, goes on for a lot longer. There's a couple of very quick scenes that are cut. You see Halloran's journey back to the Overlook a lot more, which isn't in the cut I saw, and maybe making things like longer does help with the tension and everything like that as well. So yeah,
while watching this film, I was like, I do not remember Halloran like getting back to the Overlook Hotel. I do not remember half of the setup for like I remembered this movie as being Jack Nicholson walks into an office, gets given a job, and then he's at the Overlook Hotel. But there's so much more that happens before that as well.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a Tony Burton, who's Duke in Rocky, plays the like garage attendant who isn't at all in the cut of the film that I saw.
Wow.
Yeah.
There we go.
Interestingly, speaking of Rocky as well, one thing that like really blew me away about this film, watching it again, knowing more about film and film history, is like fucking the Steadicam work in this film is insane. It's like for 1980 as well, especially. Like it was the creator of the Steadicam, whose name I can't remember, was heavily involved in the film, and this was one of the first like
Cameron Steady.
What was his name?
Edit that back in, so I said it immediately.
Garrett Brown. He was heavily involved in it, but yeah, there was the early sort of 6 films that were used the Steadicam, and the first 3 of which were Bound for Glory, Marathon Man, and of course Rocky, which came out in 1976, and then this was one of the other ones. But like the shot of like following Danny biking through, and the way that he's on this like plastic tricycle, that like the sound of the wheel on the wood is quite loud, and then when he goes over like a rug, it's like completely silent, and it's following him so low to the ground. And the other shot that blew me away as well, it's an iconic sort of opening to the film, these like helicopter shots following the car leading up to the Overlook Hotel. And there's this one shot that starts really like quite high, goes within a few inches of the road, it seems like, and like right up behind the car, and then takes out and then continues off over the lake. And it's like, I would be impressed by that shot today if it was done on a drone.
Yeah.
And it's do that exactly. Hanging out of a helicopter with like a Steadicam is fucking insane. It's I blew me away, that shot and the use of the Steadicam, especially knowing that this was only a few years after Rocky, which I knew, you know, the going up the steps scene was essentially a promo for the Steadicam.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you expect that from Kubrick. Like, with this, we haven't covered him before on the podcast. He only has 2 films that have been turned into franchises, because 2001 also got a sequel in 2010.
That's right.
I mean, it didn't get a sequel in the year 2010. It got a sequel in the film that is called 2010.
Which came out in 2001.
But greatest director of all time. What do you think, AJ?
I don't think I've seen enough Kubrick to
what have you seen?
Fully. All right. I think I'm gonna double check, but I've seen. I think my favorite Kubrick is probably Eyes Wide Shut. I've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. I've seen Full Metal Jacket. I've seen The Shining. I've seen Doctor Strangelove, and that is it. So I've seen all the a lot of the main ones. I'm just missing Barry Lyndon, Clockwork Orange, Lolita, and then there's a bunch of other ones that I don't think he's as well known for. Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, Spartacus.
Yeah, I've only seen The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, and kind of Doctor Strangelove. There was a screening of Full Metal Jacket the night before The Shining screening, which I wanted to go to, but I did not go.
This is blowing my mind that he's only directed I thought he was like a Spielberg kind of, like, I thought he had done way more movies than this. This is blowing my mind. Wow, I thought he was more like Ridley Scott. Like, I always conflate those two together.
No.
But,
yeah.
Interesting. I think that this is this film's certainly a great showcase for that, but it's also like, what do people want out of films? That's what I was thinking about during this. Is what experiences are people after? Because is he the greatest filmmaker of all time? I'll tell you what, those final like 30 minutes of the film, the whole, everything that includes like the axe, him chasing Wendy with the axe, and here's Johnny and chasing them around the snow. I think that is so just immersive. It is so terrifying. I feel like it's one of my favorite feelings a movie can give me that I've discovered recently is I'll think imagine if this happened to you. And I watch the end of The Shining and I see like Danny running out into the pitch black night to escape the Overlook Hotel, and it's snowing and all this. And I'm just like, imagine if that happened to you. Imagine if like you were being chased.
Imagine if you had to run after this fucking little kid and like you couldn't find him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is so scary. And so that sort of, yes, I guess he is, because he's made like this very effective, evocative piece of work. But like, I don't know, maybe you like Wes Anderson movies, and that's okay. That can be your favorite. You know, maybe he's the best director, or
like, what
or
if
whatever.
you were perfectly centered?
Yeah. What if that happened? Yeah. So I feel like do you know what it is? I'm still grappling with the knowledge that I've actually seen most Stanley Kubrick movies.
Right.
That's what's distracted me completely here, because I thought there were so many I hadn't. I mean, there still are. I've seen less than half.
Could you name a film you thought was Kubrick?
No, I guess I just assumed there were more.
No.
That's crazy. In my Letterboxd review that I wrote, I blatantly just went, things I want to discuss on my podcast. So we've talked about a few of them already. Red Rum, Is It Cringe Now? And the final 30 minutes. I want to talk about the performances, though, because I think that of the three leads, Danny, Wendy, and Jack, or Danny, Shelley, and Jack, depending if you're calling them by their confusing real names or not, I think maybe one of the like greatest casts, greatest trios ever put to screen. I think that like they're all so good in such different ways as well, because like people remember this as like the Jack Nicholson movie, like this is Jack Nicholson's best performance. I think he's probably the least impressive of the three, or at least his performance is not one that surprises me, because it's a famous, really good, really angry, crazy performance by like one of the greatest actors to ever do it. You know?
Yeah, well, that's also we've got a big segment coming up, but which we'll go into there. But which is a segment I'm doing because I've got a lot of information about it, but
right.
Stephen King famously hating this film, which I've got a lot more information about, but he the thing of like, it's not a surprising performance from Jack Nicholson is kind of one of the biggest issues as well.
I feel the same about Nicolas Cage in Longlegs. I feel like that his performance in Longlegs is what Nicolas Cage does now. Right, it is so, like, for people to be like, oh my god, it was stunning. Nick Cage was, it's like, is it? This is no crazier than fucking Renfield.
But yeah, no, Shelley Duvall is a fantastic performance, but you know, it does beg the question of like, where is that line of was Kubrick justified in his? I didn't write down anything to actually give like details of what is alleged to have happened on the set between the two of them, but is it worth it? You know.
Well, I think that diminishes Shelley Duvall's abilities as an actress, and I think as well, like, I feel like I've heard something recently, like she spoke before she died, because she died pretty recently. She died a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But like I think she spoke about this, and it wasn't as like harmful as it had.
Yeah, she
had made it out.
There was
to be.
like the head of the Shelley Duvall fan club on TikTok. Is that? I'm guessing that's also where you're getting your information.
I got
like,
mine from a podcast that was maybe referencing this TikTok.
But she sort of like became friends with Shelley in just like her last few years, and would bring her fan mail and things like that. It's very, very sweet sort of stuff, because she fell out of the public eye, retired from acting. In fact, actually all three lead actors in the film retired from acting.
Canonically have all retired,
yeah. Jack Nicholson retired, and Danny Lloyd only acted one other time after The Shining.
Well, he retired first. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Do you know his only other credit?
What is it?
Doctor Sleep. He plays Jacob Tremblay's dad.
No way. Huh, that's so funny. Yeah, Shelley Duvall in this movie it's just this like, I think it's a breathtaking performance. I think the way she is able to like make herself seem so small and vulnerable is just, it's so good. She's a little bit weird looking, and that absolutely adds to it. Like there's just,
she's got a very
this,
expressive
like,
face with like, she's got very
it's
big
so
eyes.
helpless. And the Here's Johnny scene where he breaks through the door, those shots of her reacting to the axe coming through, I feel like those are just as iconic as the face poking through the hole, you know.
Also, like the scene where
he's
chasing her up the stairs with the axe, the "Gimme the Bat Marge" scene, where and she's like very tiredly like swinging this bat at him, and they famously had to do that scene like 130 times or something like that, like insane amounts. I was reading that Scatman Crothers is who plays Dick Halloran. It was originally Slim Pickens was offered the role, but he said, "I'll only do it if we can do my scenes in less than 100 takes," and Kubrick said, "Absolutely not." And so he didn't end up doing it. But Scatman Crothers and Slim Pickens, both funny names. But I learned that Halloran is played by Scatman Carruthers watching this film this time for the podcast, and also learning that Carruthers is spelt that way and not what I'd assumed, which is some sort of like corduroy situation where it's like Carruthers. But it's not. It's just Crothers. Yeah, Crothers. He was in something else I watched recently.
Doctor Sleep.
But yeah, but just that. He is in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is what I was thinking. But because that scene was done so many times, and also testament to Shelley Duvall's acting. Like, oh my god, she looks so worn down in that scene, and like is barely holding on to the bat, let alone going to be able to fucking smash her husband's head in with it. But one thing you've alluded to a couple of times there is the "Here's Johnny" scene, which is the film's most famous shot or moment, probably. It's the thing that gets referenced the most. Do you want to just sort of briefly explain what it is?
What it is, what film is, what celluloid is, Richard, what printing our dreams on to film.
AJ, I wanted to take a sip of water. Don't throw it back to me. Just explain the "Here's Johnny" scene.
Jack is going crazy, and Shelley is hiding. Wendy is hiding, so it's confusing. She's hiding in the bathroom with the door locked, and he axes down the door, then pokes his head through, and yells, "Here's Johnny," which I believe is a reference to Late Night or an old late.
So, Johnny Carson, who was the host of the Tonight Show for 30 years, which is like, think about that. Like, the only reason we still have late night TV is because of Johnny Carson for that amount of time. Like 30 years, our entire life, or just about. Imagine that the same face was on your screen. He had guest hosts and he took time off, but like in your home every night for 30 years, just like, and one of the most beloved figures. It's insane to think about. But But Ed McMahon was his announcer, and so the start of every show, they would do the intro saying, we've got blah, blah, blah coming up on the show. Here's Johnny. And that was how they would start the Tonight Show. So, super ubiquitous reference. These days, people know it as a The Shining reference. But one of my favorite things I've seen discussed about The Shining is if you made this movie today, what would Jack say when he pops his head through? What is the equivalent today? So that's the context of what Here's Johnny meant to audiences in 1980. The closest thing I've seen that I've seen a bunch, but I can't remember any of them, but the only one that I was like, oh yes, that makes sense, would be for him to break down the door, pop his head through, and say, "Live from New York, it's Saturday night."
Yeah, right.
Because that's also like a cultural touchstone that's been on the air for a long time.
If this was remade in like another 30 years, he'd pop his head through the door and sing the Skibbity Toilet song, I reckon.
Yeah. Or he'd be like...
Or he'd be the head coming out of the toilet.
Yeah. It'd be like, don't forget to like and subscribe. Smash that like button. Smash that like button is kind of...
It would be smash that, or it would be like Welcome to Hot Ones, the show with hot questions and even hotter wings. Yeah. Like, these are the late nights of our time, is like YouTube shows,
Yeah. It's just a theory. A game theory.
Exactly. Or if it was Australian, it'd be like, say hi to your mum for me.
Yes. That's a Rove reference, Rove Live reference.
Yeah, no, also, we're doing a lot of Rove Live references.
Yeah, on the Inside Out, or whenever we were talking about Rove recently, it was Inside Out.
I think it was on the Inside Out Patreon
episodes. Yeah. I said when I thought Rove ended, and then you said when Peter Hallier's movie came out, and we were both 2 years out. So it's just that you adjusted your guess, but due to my incorrection. But I remember because I think I said it ended in 2007. But of course it ended in 2009 because the final guest on it was Sam Worthington. And it's like, he was a nobody in 2007. He was there promoting the one notable thing he's done, which is Avatar. But yeah. Any other, it's interesting because the Here's Johnny thing. I would love to have been an audience member in 1980 just to see how that lands, Yeah, because if that happened, if something like what we're talking about happened in a movie now, I'd probably find it kind of weird, when when and Black Panther when she says one of those, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is exactly it. That it's the same thing. It's Pokemon Go to the polls. Imagine you said that broke through the door. Pokemon Go to the polls.
Yeah,
and so it does. I wouldn't be surprised if you went back in time and people were like, yeah, it was real weird. I felt kind of weird in Bo Burnham's 8th grade when they make Pickle Rick references, I was like, oh, that's a bit strange. But
I 8th grade's an interesting example because that film is made to be anachronistic the week after it came out. That was Bo Burnham's intention. It's this is what 8th grade is like for everyone. It's this is what 8th grade is like in 2019.
Currently.
The end of 2019, specifically. Or whenever it was, toward 2018 maybe. But
you can do it, man.
but yeah, Here's Johnny, just the fact that it's for much more quaint audiences in 1980, and especially the fact that it was this source of comfort for them as well. That it's, Here's Johnny is usually the arrival of old reliable Johnny Carson making jokes about my ex-wife. That's my Johnny Carson impression.
Whereas here's this guy trying to kill his current wife.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. Funny stuff. Anyway, the ending of the film is interesting, where it's talking about the very ending of the film, an oft debated shot where after Jack has frozen to death outside and the family have gotten away, the camera zooms into this photo on the wall from the July 4th ball, 1921, and Jack is there. Nicholson, potentially not Jack Torrance,
Oh,
holding a sign. So he's been there since 1921, or what? What's your interpretation of that, AJ?
I just assumed that I'd forgotten. Oh yeah, The Shining's a time travel movie. That's what I assume. Or is it more like the Overlook Hotel strikes me as kind of like a grey area in this time space continuum? Like you walk in there and it's not exactly time travel because you can't leave the hotel.
Well, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. But yeah, well, because the bartender that he meets is called Grady. Which is the name of the guy who murdered his family previously, although he has a different first name. So it's, there's two Gradys randomly, and there's a lot of analysis about this. But I think the Doctor Sleep, actually, the film and the original and both novels, I think make the Overlook a more of like an active character in the story, which is interesting. And I sort of interpret it as like he's absorbed by the hotel or something like that. But I will say that shot led to one of my favorite jokes of all time on broadcast television. Although actually I think, to be fair, it was on streaming at this point. But in Community, there's an episode where Chang goes through this door and like performs to this crowd. And each time he goes, and I can't remember the exact setup of the episode, but then at the end they're like, oh, that's just like a storage closet. There hasn't been a theater for like 30 years. And then the final shot of the episode is like all these photos on a wall, and in the middle one is sepia, and it slowly zooms into Chang's face in the middle of it. He's surrounded by people with all these like old clothes, and then it tilts down to the placard he's holding, and it says Old Timey Photo Club 2016.
Very nice.
Yeah, the fucking fantastic joke. But there was talking about the thing of the Overlook being an active or inactive character, and this is sort of where we'll get into what I was saying earlier about Stephen King's feelings on the film, because I think it's quite interesting to talk about. There was a tweet earlier in the week that went sort of viral, people agreeing about or not with the interpretation. But there was, the first thing was like just a shot from the film where at the very start of the film, so this is before they've even got to the Overlook Hotel, Danny says, because they're talking about the Donner Party, right? And says like, oh, I don't think we should be talking about cannibalism in front of the kid. And Danny says, oh, don't worry, Mom, I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV. And Jack goes, see, it's okay. He saw it on the television. And this was retweeted, and he says it like that as well. He says it very sinisterly. But that's just how Jack Nicholson talks, I guess. It was retweeted, and this is the thing that went viral. It said, I get why King hates it, but Kubrick was 1,000% correct that unspeakable violence lurks under the surface of patriarchal domesticity is a much better story than What If a House Was Evil. And because, yeah, the thing is that famously, the sort of difference in King's big issue with the film is that, and I'll see if I can actually find his quote about it. So he says Jack in the film, the character Jack, has no arc. He says Stephen King believes he's crazy right from the start, and that, and he did sort of say that like Kubrick saw the haunting coming, and this is like actually from conversations that King and Kubrick had, that like Kubrick saw it as being about like Jack's demons are haunting his family essentially, and Stephen King saw it about these actual demons that are haunting a good person. And a really good sort of follow-up tweet I saw to that, which sums it up, I think, is that The Shining, the novel, which came out in 1977, so it was only a few years old when the film came out, was written by an alcoholic. And it's like contains some partially autobiographical stuff. It was when Stephen King was really struggling with his alcoholism, whereas the film is made by the son of an alcoholic. And so Stephen King writing this book about this demon that is turning him into a person he shouldn't be, and he's just a good man at the heart of it. Whereas Kubrick is making this film that says the monster that is my dad has poisoned my family.
Right. That's pretty interesting because there's a mini series adaptation of The Shining as well, isn't
Yes,
there?
came in 97, yeah.
And Stephen King is a lot more fond of that one.
Yeah, that's right. He's yeah, he was a lot more involved in it. It's filmed at the actual Stanley Hotel, which was the inspiration for the Overlook as well, which was apparently one of King's big issues that he didn't film it there.
All right, wow.
But yeah, he also said that Shelley Duvall as Wendy is one of the most misogynistic characters ever put to film. This is his quote. She basically just there to scream and be stupid. That's not the woman I wrote about.
This is really you don't get this kind of candor these days, do you? Like if Stephen King said this now, he'd probably be like soft cancelled. Like I feel like that. It's really interesting that he met and was like gave away the rights to his novel to Stanley Kubrick and is like assassinating his character here by being like,
I don't think he'd be soft cancelled these days. But I think like especially being like the character in the film isn't as strong as the one I wrote, which is true. By all accounts.
All right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, yeah, she doesn't have much of an agency in the film, whereas I think she does a lot more in the novel. But that's also, a lot of that stuff gets cut out.
I reckon this is a writer thing versus a director thing, because, like, I don't know, like, I kind of, and on this watch of The Shining, I felt like what I was watching was less of like a weaved story with weaved character arcs and more just like, what if people were put in this situation? And in that sense, I think she's incredible in it because she doesn't, like you'd think the way King talks about her, it's like she's a poorly written or weak character in this, but she's not. She's resilient. She's like taking on this like both her husband and this like archaic evil. Like I don't know. I think that like I find her performance to be super grounded and super like relatable and really earnest and an interesting insight into seeing how someone would react in a situation I will hopefully never find myself in.
Yeah. And like he did say though that like even when a director such as Stanley Kubrick makes such a maddening, perverse, and disappointing film as The Shining, it somehow retains a brilliance that is inarguable. It is simply there. So he does say, like, it's a very good film. It's, like, not the one I wrote, and I hate it. Right, like, he has said that, he's willing to admit good stuff to it. And Stephen King is usually fairly hands off, I think, with a lot of his adaptations. Like, he has his Dollar Babies where he sells stories to although he just cancelled that recently actually. He sells his like short stories to film students for $1. But yeah, one thing that I wanted to talk about is that Jack Nicholson was Stanley Kubrick's first choice for the role. He, not long after his win for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of the hottest actors in Hollywood. But that is kind of one of the issues of the film because you see Jack Nicholson, you go, oh, that's the guy, saw him a few years ago in that really good movie about the guy in the mental institution. He shows up in this film and you're like, damn, he's crazy again. And then he just gets crazier throughout the film. And so if he had turned it down, Kubrick wanted Chris Christopherson, interestingly. But other people that were sort of considered were Robert De Niro, Harrison Ford, and Robin Williams. And Stephen King really pushed for him to cast someone like Jon Voight, Michael Moriarty, who people might know from Law & Order, Martin Sheen, or Christopher Reeve. And while I think that it's a great performance, I think like Jack Nicholson is one of the greatest actors. I do think he's better in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest because I think that's one of, if not the greatest film performance of all time. There is going to be a part of me that is always going to be like, oh, what if, like, I would love to see this film with Harrison Ford or Robin Williams or Christopher Reeve as like, because if you're adapting Stephen King's story, which, at the start of it, he's this perfectly affable, like, lovely family man, but like, imagine having literal Superman, the first Superman on screen, the embodiment of good and uncorruptibility, playing this beloved family man at the start and then going insane by the end of it. it's like it's not Kubrick's vision for the film. I understand that, and the whole thing we said about just that it's underlying. But man, I would love to see that. And Harrison Ford, like this kind of performance from Harrison Ford would be fascinating. Robin Williams as well. Would have been a really interesting.
This is what I wanted to talk about, because I feel like some of those actors, they've had their Jack Torrance in their career, for whether it was like they've played.
Well, Harrison Ford has his
Harrison
coming
Ford,
out with General Ross, President Ross, in Captain America 4.
I was going to say for Harrison Ford, I reckon his What Lies Beneath character is Jack Torrance-y.
Right.
And you know, you've got Robin Williams, I'd say, in like something like 1 Hour Photo is very Jack Torrance-y. Or Insomnia. And then with Robert De Niro, you've got Greg Focker's dad and father-in-law.
Yeah.
That's his Jack Torrance.
Yeah. Like De Niro also has a little bit more these days, has a little bit of the like beneath the surface stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'd heard De Niro, Ford, and Williams before, and John Voight, but I hadn't heard Christopher Reeve until today, and that's the one where I'm like, fuck, that would be so fascinating. Like, I was thinking about this the other day, that, you know, the opening of Once Upon a Time in the West, where it's like, and this was how it was pitched, was that you see a small child get shot, and then we close up on the gun, and then we tilt up from the gun to the shooter's face and reveal it's Henry Fonda, and people would lose their fucking minds because it's, you know, the one time he played a villain. That it's like, I can't think of any like an actor you could do specifically that shot with that would have the same like crazy metatextuality today that would make people lose their minds.
Well, I mean, you've got Chris Evans in Knives Out. I think, you know, not to toot my own video essay from 2019 when I was still making video essays, but it is that same thing as like, what if you took Captain America and made him like a Donald Trump allegory?
Yeah, make him represent the worst parts of America. But but even still, I'm not going like, I just think that the concept of playing against type, or even really actors being typecast, isn't as prevalent as it maybe once was. It's more the thing.
Not. Yeah.
But yeah, I want to talk about, just quickly before is there anything else you want to talk about? I haven't got a detailed list of differences between the film and the novel. The big one is Stephen King's thing. But yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about? And
well, unfortunately, our unpaid intern Rachel, who usually reads the novel for us, she's up and moved away to a hotel for the winter where she's going to focus on her writing or something, and couldn't quite be there for
Luckily,
us.
she's got a wife and kid to keep her company, so
yeah.
Otherwise, she'd probably
look, sorry, Rachel, this is an emergency record episode because I'm about to go away for a month, so we're packing a bunch of episodes, and it wasn't until today that we were like, of all of the movies we've covered that in which someone reading the novels would have been like, not that it hasn't been part of the discussion, but, you know, of all the franchises we've done, this would be a good one to do it for. So sorry, Rachel, maybe we could do a film franchise follow-ups episode if you did want to read them, or something like that.
But yeah, the key difference is, one of the key differences is the ending of the novel. I'm not sure if you know this, but I was going to say famously, but I was like, actually, I don't know if this is. I'm finally starting to restrict myself on my usage of that word. But there's no maze in the novel. The sort of the obstacle outside is topiaries. They're like bushes shaped to look like animals, and they come to life, which wouldn't have really been able to do convincingly in 1980. But I'm just going to read you like the Wikipedia plot synopsis for the book, for the last sort of paragraph of how the book ends, just because it's interesting going into Doctor Sleep. So, as Jack pursues Danny through the hotel and corners him on the top floor, he briefly gains control of himself and implores Danny to flee. The hotel quickly retakes control of Jack, making him violently batter his own face and skull into ruin with the mallet, leaving his body under the hotel's control. Remembering that Jack has neglected to relieve the pressure on the hotel's unstable boiler, Danny informs the hotel that it is about to explode. as Danny, Wendy, and Halloran flee, so Halloran survives up to this point, the hotel creature rushes to the basement in an attempt to vent the pressure, but it is too late. The boiler explodes, killing Jack and destroying the Overlook Hotel. Fighting off a last attempt by the hotel to possess him, Halloran guides Danny and Wendy to safety. So, might sound familiar to you, that ending.
Yeah, that's the ending of Doctor Sleep, ostensibly.
Yeah. So, but also, a lot more of the hotel is possessing him.
I was interested by the line, the hotel creature goes down to shut the boiler room off. Like, what is the hotel creature?
Well, it says that, like, when he smashes his face in, and so Jack is dead, for all intents and purposes, and is just possessed by the hotel.
I see.
Yeah, so interesting. A lot more of the what if a house was evil interpretation.
Yeah, and also like it somewhat redeems Jack. It's that same thing that we talked about before with the differences between written by an alcoholic and the son of an alcoholic. Is that in the one written by an alcoholic, there's a moment where the crazy man is able to regain his self and be like, this is not what I want for myself. Whereas from this other perspective, he's given no opportunity to redeem himself.
Yeah. So, in 2013, Stephen King released the novel Doctor Sleep, which is a sequel to The Shining.
2013? Wow, that came out ages after.
I remember when it came. And to tell you what, I remember when he put up on his Twitter a poll saying, should I write the Shining sequel next or the next Dark Tower book next? Because he'd been toying with them both for a wee while. And I remember I remember when I first saw the book Doctor Sleep, because I was so fascinated by the idea that The Shining was getting a sequel, even though, it wasn't a film I was particularly attached to or anything like that. And I'd never read the book.
Is it the only Shining sequel?
Yes.
Because Stephen King's got this whole, like, Tarantino-esque, like, interconnected world.
There are... I did see that there are things that loop in, especially like because the Dark Tower series sort of connects a lot of stuff. I did see references to it, but it's stuff that I don't find particularly important, and I figured you wouldn't either. But any Stephen King hardcore fans that want to know that stuff probably already know it. Is the other thing. But yeah, the film came out in 2019, and what do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
75.
78%. So it is it is below the original, but not by an awful lot. It's directed by Mike Flanagan. I don't think I said that. Who people would probably mostly know from his Netflix series Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, all those sort of ones. He also did a couple of movies for Gerald's Game, things like that. What's this one about?
So this one is 30 years later? How much time later? 40 years later?
30 years.
Danny is all grown up into Ewan McGregor, and he still has the Shining, and he goes around his days as an orderly at a hospital where he sort of comforts dying patients and earns the nickname Dr. Sleep because he can sort of like relieve people of their death concerns
by talking to them telepathically and
powers.
Just before that, it's worth mentioning as well that there's a little time jump before it gets to that point, because when we first meet Danny, he got PTSD from everything he went through in the original film, and is a severe alcoholic, and then he goes to AA, gets sober, and then there's a time jump.
Yeah.
Will be very
but along the way, while this is all happening, a woman played by Rebecca Ferguson called Rose the Hat and her ragtag team of misfits, they are going around America slurping up the souls of anyone. Is it anyone who's got like Shining adjacent abilities? Is
they feed on steam, which is a psychic essence released by torturing and killing people with The Shining.
Yeah, there you go. So they are going around, and basically Dr. Sleep himself feels the call of adventure to stop this from happening. He teams up with a very powerful young shining girl who he meets because they can telepathically communicate via a blackboard that is set up in his room for a contrived plot reason. And yeah, they take on this team of like undead soul suckers. Is that a good synopsis of the film?
So the film also did the third act of the film finds them returning to the Overlook Hotel because it's dangerous for people with The Shining, and they're like, well, it's dangerous for us, but it'll be dangerous for her too. So they revisit the Overlook Hotel, and then, as we sort of said before, Danny gets possessed by the hotel, chasing after Abra, which is the girl's name. It regains control for a moment, and then the hotel explodes and is destroyed. Had you seen this film before? What did you think of it?
Richard, I had seen it before. I saw it at the movies in
at
19?
19, yeah.
At the Picture Theatre. And it was pretty interesting because I remember listening to an early 2019 episode of The Weekly Planet, Mr. Sunday Movies podcast, in which he had got some like industry scoop that one of the big tentpole releases of 2019 was like an embarrassing dud. Like it was going to do so badly with critics and people were abandoning it left, right, and center. And at the time, I remember thinking, it's got to be Dr. Sleep.
Interesting.
Right? Like this distant sequel to this like incredible film that no one has wanted to touch really in any form since. Like there has been no franchising of The Shining as much as we've seen with other similar intellectual properties. Like I was like, it looks so average. It's such a bad idea. I didn't know the book came out in 2013, which perhaps would have changed my opinion, because that kind of changes a little bit, I think, knowing that the book itself did not exist for like a legacy sequel's size distance. But no, I saw it in the cinemas, and I think that
Did you ever find out what the 2019 embarrassment was?
I'm pretty sure it was Hellboy, the David Harbour one.
Oh yeah, interesting. Because it could also be Rise of Skywalker.
Probably,
Godzilla, King of Monsters. Also, Dark Phoenix came out in 2019.
Yeah. There are a lot of. I never heard what it was confirmed to be, but those were the stinkers for sure. I think this movie's real good. I think it's shocking how good it is. I think that it shouldn't work as well as it does, and that one of the reasons it works so well is that it is so unafraid to be its own thing. It is so unafraid to not be what you'd expect a Shining Legacy sequel to be like, which is interesting because if I say that about something like Lord of the Rings in regards to The Hobbit or any of the Terminator sequels or anything like that, you would think that what I'm talking about is like this need to remind you of the bigger, better movie that it's referencing and you know, like the origins of why Bilbo's sword is called Sting and shit like that. And Dr. Sleep does not have stuff like that in it. There's a scene where they re-explain The Shining to you, and they say the words "The Shining" over and over again, and it feels very okay, I get it now. There's another bit where, like, when they return to the Overlook, where it was in all the trailers, where Danny looks through, looks through the hole in the
Johnny
door.
Hole.
So. Yeah, here's Johnny Hole, the Johnny Hole, and it's like these should be things that ruin the movie, but I think there is just something so unafraid from it that it doesn't feel desperate. It just feels like, well, yeah, this is what this character would probably do, you know. And I think that it also works because unlike any of these other legacy sequels, this movie takes an approach of like basically just recreating scenes from The Shining or The Shining time period with new actors, which is like something, you know, if Star Wars did that, they'd be if Marvel did it, one of the characters would be digitally de-aged, one of the characters would be recast, and like one of them would just be like not seen on screen or something like that. But it just feels like it swallows the annoying little reality wrinkle that those actors aren't available and don't look the same age anymore by just being like, yeah, it's fine, we'll just get lookalikes. And so it gives it this confidence, I guess, that makes it feel like its own thing.
It's a confidence. Like, not only does the film starts, there's a tiny little bit at the start which starts like immediately after the film, after The Shining, where there's a new actor playing Danny, there's a new Wendy, and then later on in the film we do also meet an apparition of Jack, who's now the bartender at the Overlook Hotel. But we also see a couple of shots from the original film which have been recreated with those new actors. And fantastic decision, like everything you just said. That it's incredible. It's a confidence, and it's totally just like, yeah, deal with it. Like, I don't give a shit. Like,
get over it.
But Mike Flanagan was asked about it, and this is the quote he sort of said. We explored everything, and there were only really two options as I saw it. It was either going to be something that was performed or something that was digital. And even if we had Nicholson come back based on the rules of the hotel and how ghosts appear with respect to their age, he'd be performing the part through a digital avatar. He said that de-aging and digital actors had been improving rapidly. Like this was a few years after we had like Rogue One, and Blade Runner. So it's like
Blade Runner.
This was very much in the era of deep fakey looking people. He said the idea of having digital Danny Torrance riding a trike 5 minutes into the movie, that just seemed like we were making a video game at that point. It felt disrespectful, saying that, while what they ended up doing might be controversial, their idea, their approach to it was to not do impressions. It was just to find actors who would remind us of those iconic performances without ever tipping into parody. I just want to be able to tilt people's memories towards those original actors and then let their characters be their own. I want to cast someone to play Dick Halloran. I don't want to cast someone to play Scatman Crothers. Which is, perfect. Like, Scatman Crothers specifically has a very distinctive voice, so he is doing a little bit. But yeah, I love that they're not doing impressions of anyone. They're just, that's how you find people that look enough like the part to do it. And he did say that they did talk about casting a Jack Nicholson impersonator was considered, or casting a big name actor who's associated with or reminiscent of him in some way, such as Leonardo DiCaprio or Christian Slater. Nicholson was also invited to make a cameo as another character, but declined. And it's mentioned as well that they sort of said like, oh, we know he because Danny Lloyd, who I mentioned, has a cameo on the film, and he'd retired. He's a school teacher. He DM'd him on Mike Flanagan DM'd him on Twitter, and apparently he was super happy to come back. They said they didn't extend the same offer to Jack Nicholson. The producer said like, they approached him for Ready Player One, which also has a big sequence set in The Shining because they couldn't get the rights to Blade Runner. That he seems to be very serious about being retired. He's supportive of Dr. Sleep, but very much retired. But I do want to talk about the idea of, because Mike Elliott plays him, and do you know his biggest credit? The guy that plays Jack Torrance in this film?
No, tell me.
He's the kid from E.T.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, the Elliott from E.T.?
Yeah.
So his name's Mike Elliott in real life?
Yeah, I think so. Or I may be conflating that. Or no, his name's Henry Thomas. Who's Mike Elliott?
Do you know who Mike Elliott is? The director of American Pie Girls Rules.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm thinking of.
Why were you thinking of because of Elliott? Because he plays Elliott in E.T.
No, yeah, Henry Thomas. Yeah, he's the kid from E.T.
That's such a random... That's like, they're from kind of similar eras in my mind, those films. So it's basically like the same trick, but with a different franchise.
Yeah.
Like, they did bring someone back.
Yeah. He's
That's so
he's collaborated a lot with Mike Flanagan.
Wow,
yeah.
I wonder why he never became a household name.
Yeah, I think
Drew Barrymore did.
Yeah, totally. Or E.T. himself became a big name, obviously.
The puppet.
But yeah, what do you think of the idea of like DiCaprio or like Christian Slater playing him in that scene?
It's all too distracting. I was going to say, like, all of these things, the fact that there isn't an egregious Nicholson cameo, it does all these things that, like, sever itself from the sins of all these legacy sequels, and it ends up feeling like it's its own thing. I'll say this, 10 minutes longer, and it's like, just make this a miniseries. It does have
totally.
miniseries vibes, and Mike Flanagan is
The
primarily
miniseries guy.
known for directing scary miniseries.
Yeah.
And so that is maybe my only kind of thinking around it, is like, it would be an easier pill to swallow a sequel to The Shining if it's, in a technically different format. Because one thing that I do think is interesting, and one thing I wasn't sure of before I saw the film for the first time, was like, is this actually a sequel to The Shining, or is it an adaptation of Doctor Sleep?
Yeah.
Because those are two different things, and you can adapt Doctor Sleep and not be directly referencing Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Totally.
But that is not the case. It is directly, it's
So,
lifting imagery, it's lifting costume departments and sets and things. So
I have pages of notes about that very thing, but I was hoping you would ask my question back to me before I got to that part. I just would I think what you said about like DiCaprio or Slater or whatever being too distracting. I agree, and I think I knew that it was the kid from. I knew that it was not necessarily a known actor, like not someone that's going to be distracting playing him in the film. And I'd actually seen that scene before. I'd Googled at least to see what he looked like. But yeah, because also the fact that it's not Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson is a very notable to look at. That you. Because it's like he calls himself Lloyd, and it's like there is a little bit of like, is it supposed to be him or not? Because that's also where he gives Danny a drink, and he's 8 or 9 years sober at this point, and ends up declining it. But I do think that if you have like an actor like Christian Slater or Leonardo DiCaprio in that role, it does add to the sort of weight of it. Potentially that you go like, holy fuck, he's opposite a big deal. And again, talking about I just said that metatextual casting in that way doesn't work as much these days. But yeah, I think that you might still be able to do that. I kind of make it feel more like a cameo, even because it is like But the
well, Kid from E.T. isn't a good enough get. That's like small town Comic-Con like heights of celebrity, He'd be on Cameo.
Yeah, totally. One thing you haven't asked me though is, had I seen it before, and what did I think of it? And then we'll go into what you say.
I'm fucking about to. I was about to.
You had so much time to do that, AJ. I hadn't seen this film before. I hadn't really thought about it since it didn't do very well at the box office. It wasn't. Critics complained about the length and things like that, and but. This is the most blown away I've ever been by a film I still gave 4 stars. Like, I
get that.
I felt the same way I did about this film that I feel about 5-star films. Like, the fact that all the stuff you said about like how it pulls it off, and just like it's so unafraid to be its own thing, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. I thought it was incredible, but it's still a 4-star film. It's not a perfect film. But yeah, so interestingly, obviously the novel Doctor Sleep, in that the Overlook Hotel has been destroyed. So, right there we know that the third act of the film can't happen. It's also set, the climax is set in 2013, so everything takes place slightly earlier. So, of course, in the book, the way they find out that Abra has The Shining is because she predicts 9/11. But so during early talks when Mike Flanagan approached getting the rights to this and everything like that, Stephen King said that essentially on 2 conditions, that the Overlook Hotel would not appear in the film, and that you would retain the ending of the original book, not of the movie. And
wow,
so interesting.
He must be pissed.
Well, AJ, if you'd let me fucking finish, I can talk. I'll tell you what he thinks.
Okay, sorry, I'll be quiet for the rest of the podcast.
No, please don't, AJ. I want you to ask me questions.
Okay.
I don't just want to make you assumptions about how Stephen King feels about things. I want you to ask me. No, so anyway, when
this is like relationship counseling. AJ, I want you to ask me what Stephen King's feelings were, and not just assume.
But so Mike Flanagan said that essentially that like The Shining is so ubiquitous and has burned itself into the collective imagination of people who love cinema in a way that so few movies have. There's no other language to tell that story in. If you say Overlook Hotel, I see something, it lives right up in my brain because of Stanley Kubrick. You can't pretend that isn't the case. And King initially said, nope, can't have it end like that. But then Mike Flanagan wrote the scene where he talks to the bartender, who's his dad, and turns down alcohol and stuff like that, and that convinced him to allow the Overlook Hotel to appear in the film. It's like, this is the part of the film, this is the part of Danny's story and also Jack's story really, that you can only tell by using the Overlook Hotel. And then also the fact that he was going to adapt the original novel ending with the true Danny coming through for a moment, and then also the hotel exploding. I think it's a phenomenal thing of like, I don't really care that Stephen King's happy with it, but it's like amazing to be able to so well like be faithful to this novel I haven't read. I think the third act takes place where the Overlook Hotel was, or like in the ruins of it.
Right.
And Danny survives as well. Also, he doesn't survive in the film. But yeah, be able to faithfully make a sequel to The Shining that doesn't negate anything that happens in that film, but also, makes happy the guy who famously hated that. And when reading the script, Stephen King said was so satisfied with it that he said, everything I ever disliked about the Kubrick version of The Shining is redeemed for me in this film.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What a feather in the cap of Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, hard out. And They managed to get the blueprints from Stanley Kubrick's estate to faithfully rebuild the set of The Shining, of the Overlook Hotel.
Cool.
Also, when he has a job interview for the orderly position, it's the exact same office as Jack's interview in the first film, which is not like there's no lampshade hung on it or anything like that. It's just like, that looks awfully familiar, But yeah, there's actually, I mentioned there's the reshot scenes. There's 3 shots in the film which are from the original film. There's one, they're more sort of like established shots sort of thing, but there's one that's one of the helicopter shots, which is like made into day for night and had snow added onto it as well, which is interesting because it takes place in the snow. What else?
I want to talk about the supporting cast of this movie, because I think they're pretty impressive too. You've got Jacob Tremblay, who is very briefly in the film before he's murdered in, I reckon, the performance of his career. I think of his very young career. I just think like both times I've watched this movie, I've gone into that scene expecting Jacob Tremblay to like make it out and be alive in the movie in some way, whether in ghost form or whatever. No, they just murder a kid, and you watch a really well acted scene where it looks like people are murdering a child, and it's super, super harrowing, I thought.
Mike Flanagan said it's the worst thing he's ever had to do. And like apparently all the actors were like horrified, but like Rebecca Ferguson and her crew, horrified having to do this to this child, because he's so, like you say, he's so good in the scene that it feels like you're fucking murdering this little kid. Like everyone was like shaken to their core, and then Jacob Tremblay gets up and high fives his dad for a job well done, and Rebecca Ferguson is there like, what have I done?
Yeah, if I was Jacob Tremblay in this situation, I'm being so silly as soon as they call cut. Like, I'm like making so much light of it. Also in this movie, and for the second time in a row for film friend, no, actually not, because we bulk recorded these. We have Cliff Curtis, who was in Once Were Warriors. He is in Dr. Sleep. My Letterboxd review for Dr. Sleep said Cliff Curtis has been breaking my heart a lot recently, because he is, of course, a pedophile in Once Were Warriors, but in this, he's like a super supportive best friend.
He's the definition of a supporting character.
Yeah. But then he gets killed in like one of the most gut-wrenching ways I've ever seen, because he's also like a pillar of his community, right? By Danny involving him in this shenanigans, by meeting Danny and shaking his hand in the 8 years earlier prelude to the main story, it's like he's sealed his fate there, and that kills me because one of the characters is this pusher. She has the Shining, and it means her version of the Shining means she can compel people to do whatever she wants. And when they're fighting her in one of the showdowns, they manage to strike her down. And when you've like been resurrected through this ritual that these characters have, you like burst into flames and disintegrate essentially. But just before she dies, she tells Cliff Curtis to kill himself, in which he does with the shotgun he's holding, and it's fucking brutal, man. I think it's so like, it's such a gut punch.
That happens in Jessica Jones as well.
Damn.
Yeah.
To Cliff Curtis?
Nah. David Tennant says, I think an episode ends with it, and he's like, put a bullet in your head, and it's like, holy fuck! And then she like pulls the trigger, and there's no bullets left, and then Jessica Jones, like, it's to one of the supporting characters, that Jessica Jones grabs a stray bullet and shoves it in her mouth and is like, this bullet is technically in your head. You have done what he asked of you. And then so she doesn't kill herself. Which is
also kind of similar to Death Note as well. Like Death Note pulls some tricks like that.
Yeah, totally. Great. There's some really great visual sequences in this film, because this one does a lot of there's all this talk of like they organize their thoughts and like their secrets have to be hidden in like boxes in their minds and stuff like that, and then they're like infiltrating each other's minds, and Rebecca Ferguson travels the astral plane, and it's very cool to look at. It's a far cry from anything in The Shining, this does not need to be tied to The Shining at all.
Not really, no.
Even if it was like, oh yeah, we have these mind reading powers, I don't think I would even think about the fact that it's anything that, that's kind of like the power in The Shining, because as I mentioned last time, I forgot that the titular Shining is part of The Shining. It's not the thing I think about when I think about that film at all. But yeah, I mentioned just quickly, the Danny doesn't die at the end of the book. It's Danny and Abra end up actually living together, because in the film she like quite cutely calls him Uncle Dan, as to be like, hey, so people don't think you're a pedophile, I'll say you're my uncle. In the book, and actually he actually is her uncle, because
he just is a pedophile.
Jack had an affair with her mum, and or something like that. But I can't remember what the actual thing is. But she starts to, as a teenager, starts to have her own issues with alcohol. And it's also actually revealed in the book that Jack Torrance had the shine and was self-medicating with alcohol. And it's made explicit that the alcohol numbs and silences the shine.
Wow. Did not know that.
Yeah.
One fun experience I had watching this movie, Richard, is that in my apartment, one cool thing is that if I want to go pee in the toilet, I can leave the toilet door open because I live alone, and I can look in my bathroom mirror and see the TV in the reflection perfectly, so I don't have to pause TV when I go to pee. I'm a disgusting man living alone in an apartment. So I did that while watching Dr. Sleep the other night, and I did it just as the scene after Jacob Tremblay's been murdered, and Abra, who's only communicating to Danny via like writing on their shared chalkboard. Yeah. So I'm standing at the toilet peeing, and I look at my mirror, look at the screen, and in the movie, Danny looks up at his mirror and sees written on the chalkboard behind him is red rum, because he's looking at it in the reflection. I saw the scene as he looks at the mirror and sees murder written there. And I was like, why would she write red? Like, genuinely didn't realize what was happening, and was like, why would she write red rum? Because I'm reading it as murder in the mirror, therefore meaning. And then it literally was like after I'd finished and washed my hands and sat on the couch and sat back down. Away. Like, yeah, put my hog. Oh yeah, I did that in between. And then I was watching, and I was like, Wait a minute. It would have said red rum in the mirror because I was looking at it in the mirror.
That's
Isn't
really
that
funny.
a funny story?
I also think that because it would be too convoluted for it to say red rum, because it's like they'd be writing on the blackboard, but it's like this real powerful shine, so it cracks the word murder into it, and it looks really cool. But the reveal of him looking up and seeing it says red rum in the mirror, it's so good. Like I love that moment.
It makes it not cringe again.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a good way to hint at red rum again.
Totally.
One thing that's interesting. So Mike Flanagan has a Letterboxd account. And he posted.
Yes, he does.
Well, thank you for confirming. He posted a list of 16 companion films for this. For Doctor Sleep. He said, Doctor Sleep, it says there's the description of the list, Doctor Sleep was one of the biggest challenges of my career. I lived and breathed Kubrick's The Shining for months and months, but I also dove deep into Mick Garris's television adaptation and a number of other sources of inspiration. So, this is in the order that he has put them. So, you can maybe say if you think that they're particularly relevant or what. So he's got The Shining, both versions, the TV adaptation as well. Also, Room 237, which is a documentary about all the like conspiracy theories around The Shining. Apparently, not that I've heard recently, people be like,
I've heard not that good. Yeah.
Not that good. It's just like actually insane stuff. Then after that, he has Logan.
Okay.
A Logan style send off for the character. And then after that, he has Monsters Inc.
Okay. I mean, this is, that's almost like him doing the joke before anyone can accuse him of stealing the like scream power.
Those are the most kind of interesting ones. And some of them are quite obvious why they're there. But Near Dark, The Dead Zone, Leaving Las Vegas, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Carrie, which is another Stephen King adaptation. I think a few of these actually are. The Gift, The Sixth Sense, The Stand, Dolores Claiborne, Leon, The Professional, which the how to do a relationship between a 40-something and a little kid. Shawshank Redemption, Only Lovers Left Alive, A Perfect World, Scanners, and Firestarter.
Yeah, I mean, from the ones that I've seen, I can see some of the DNA in Doctor Sleep for sure. Yeah.
Time to continue the franchise. So, before Doctor Sleep came out, Warner Brothers had enough confidence in the film that they hired Flanagan to script a prequel with the working title Halloran, based on the character of Dick Halloran. After the disappointing box office performance, it was cancelled because there was a time when when It came out in 2017, It Chapter 1, people were like, fuck, that people love Stephen King adaptations, so Doctor Sleep was fast-tracked. One of 3 that came out that year with It Chapter 2 and Pet Sematary, all which underperformed. So they were like, no, people don't like them anymore.
People just like scary clowns, I think.
Yeah. He also confirmed that he was interested in directing a sequel focused on Abra Stone. He asked Stephen King, and he was open to the idea. As for continuing the... also, actually, there was... in 2020, they announced a spin-off TV series called Overlook, which was J.J. Abrams was going to be directing for HBO Max. It was... got into trouble because of COVID, the industry shut down and stuff. In 2021, they said, we're busy working away at Bad Robot, and then HBO felt that it didn't fit their slate and it wouldn't move forward there, and then they were shopping it around. Picked up by Netflix the following year, but then I read on a different Wikipedia page that it actually was passed by Netflix as well, so I don't think that'll come out.
I don't think it should come out. I think this is like the kind of show that was part of a trend that is kind of over now.
Yeah,
like
Ratchet.
This is between Bates Motel and Ratchet. I feel like that maybe like 6 or 7 year period is where you would release something like this, and I think people have caught on to the Gothams and the Smallvilles, all these Smallville clones which try to like piggyback off big IP without doing anything. Like, they essentially tell original stories with the wallpaper of the IP they've nabbed,
Yeah, totally. Also interesting though, Henry Thomas, speaking of Bates Motel, is in the think he's in. I can't remember which film he's in, but he's in one of the Psycho films as well. So he's played.
Oh wow!
He plays young Norman Bates. So he's played both
Really?
Norman Bates and Jack Torrance. Yeah,
That's crazy because I nearly brought up before when you were talking about how good Christopher Reeve would have been as Jack Torrance. I nearly brought up about how Jeremy Davies nearly played Norman Bates in the Psycho remake.
yeah.
On like similarly brilliant missed casting opportunities. So we could have been talking about people cast as Norman Bates a lot earlier in this episode, Rich. It's all connected in a poorly timed segue of life.
But yeah, as for the book, no further novels. I believe just like during the press tour for Dr. Sleep, he had sort of said he's been kicking around ideas. Never say never kind of thing.
Yeah.
AJ, though, do you have a continue the franchise?
Yeah, well, Richard, because I'm a bigwig studio producer who only cares about making money, and I've got my finger on the pulse of what's doing well in Hollywood at the moment, we've got this movie about all these people with special powers that come together to like fight each other. Where is the Rose the Hat movie? Where is any of these? Like, we're essentially watching an Avengers-style team-up for a bunch of characters that have been invented for the movie. So, Dr. Sleep, that's Danny's superhero name. Let's go and watch some of these origin movies for some of these other characters, maybe. Because that's all that audiences want to see.
Yeah. Also, yeah, nice. So,
what about you?
Yeah, I like my one is kind of just like I can't be bothered watching a TV series. I just want to see, give me a remake of The Shining, of the novel, give me a proper adaptation of the novel and cast a real everyman actor in it that I've heard of, so it will matter to me because I don't know the guy that plays him in the TV series. My other thought would be that this would make a great, and which is, kind of actually stealing from Ready Player One, is that, the Overlook Hotel would be a great, level for like a Dead by Daylight or, some kind of VR
sure, yeah.
thing. It's such an iconic thing.
The blood flood is triggered. Everybody get to higher ground.
Yeah, like it'd be a great map for a video game. And
maybe ultimate chicken horse map.
Yeah.
The Overlook Hotel, and the flood comes out.
So that is, our podcast on The Shining and Dr. Sleep. We've got a couple more segments to get. But it is worth mentioning, AJ, that as of Dr. Sleep, you and I have watched 900 films for the podcast.
Amazing.
What's been your
900th? Nymphomaniac Volume 1. No.
And what's your least favourite?
I reckon my favourite is probably Before Sunset. And my least favorite is probably Nymphomaniac Volume 2.
Yeah, I mean, the Before trilogy are probably my favorite actual films. But my favorite that I've discovered because of the podcast that I wouldn't have watched otherwise would be Scream. It's always
you don't reckon you would have watched Scream otherwise?
Probably not.
I reckon you would have.
I would still probably be refusing to watch horrors.
Wow, that's really beautiful that we've had such an important effect on your life. Like, it's like this emotional character growth, but the resolution is you watch horror movies. It's okay. So this guy got over his alcoholism by writing a novel. You watch horror movies.
Yeah, the swings and roundabouts. All right. FFF ranking, and it's time to rank that franchise. So we take that
franchise.
We take it a thing, and we put it on the list.
I mean, this is we just ranked Blade Runner as our highest duology ever, and I don't think this is as good as Blade Runner, but it's like,
oh my god,
yeah. But this is there's nothing. I would say The Shining is still the better movie, but it's Dr. Sleep is its own thing, which is the next best thing
up there, though,
a sequel can do.
Yeah,
I think this is a cardinal rule of franchises, Richard. I think that if you are making a sequel to a beloved tentpole, that if you can't make something better, you got to make something that is its own thing or is different. Because you look at something like Aliens, I think is another great example. Yeah.
What are you? Yeah. Is it to take a recent one? Is it better than Scream? We were just talking about.
I would say that it is not better than Scream as a franchise.
Is it better than the Cornetto trilogy?
What's below the Cornetto
Inside
trilogy?
Out.
Let's put it above Inside Out, but not better than Cornetto trilogy. I think that's a good place for it. I think
it's
that
12.
makes sense. Yeah, this is the 12th best franchise ever made.
Doctor Sleep should not be slept on. I'll say that much.
Doctor slept on it. Totally.
Yeah. So now, AJ, I believe it's time to reveal our next franchise, which, because we're recording these in a bloody wacky order, I'm having to actually really remember what we're going to be doing next. But I believe it's the Patreon poll that is currently out, which, for people listening, was out a month or so ago, because it's yeah. So I'm going to head over to Patreon, AJ. Well, why don't you bloody give us the
the spiel?
The Spielberg.
Yeah, if you guys enjoyed this episode, then please consider following us on all the many dying social media platforms, like Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at Cult Popture, or you can hop on our Discord, where you can talk to us personally, tell us what you thought was good. We'd love to hear your thoughts on our thoughts. And of course, also, you can head over to the Patreon, whereas for as little as $1, you get to be involved in the show in some, I'll say it, Richard, some pretty fundamental ways. Like, I think we give our patrons too much power. So yeah.
Yeah, we're practically giving them away. It's like we say things like that so that people buy. So AJ, it's do you want to try and guess what the winning franchise is? It's a duology.
I mean, this is a voted on one, so I feel like I know it. You should probably just tell me.
It's a duology. It consists of two films.
Interesting.
They were released
both
1 year apart.
Oh, an actual piece of information. Richard, judging by the what I knew in advance, I think that the Wayne's Worlds has won.
That's correct. The Worlds
Party
of
time,
Wayne.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah, and look, I'm about to go to Canada. This will be the last franchise we watch before I go to Canada.
Yeah, we got to record this in like 2 days or something, right?
Yeah, pretty soon. 902nd film. Wait, Mike Myers has got Canadian blood in him or something, or Dana Carvey does. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, that's appropriate, I guess. And yeah, stay tuned for that. And also stay tuned for the post-credit scene, which is coming at you after this music ends. Richard, I feel like we've ticked an important one off the franchise.
Yeah, it feels like we say that every week.
It's true every time. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome along to the post-credit scene. This is a segment of the end of each episode where if you donate $5 or more over at patreon.com/cultpopture, you get to talk to us about something of your choosing in the post-credit scene. Richard, who's it from and what is it?
Today's comes to us from Vincent Busso, who says, who would win in a fight, Barbara Millicent Roberts or J. Robert Oppenheimer? Now, doesn't this feel like a quaint question to be doing over a year after the Barbie Oppenheimer phenomenon?
Yeah, who gives a shit is my answer. No, like, why would these two be compared in any way?
Well, but it's just that like this question would have been sent in and it'd be like, oh man, because of those two movies that are coming out. But it took us.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it might not have. I don't know when it was sent in.
Well, I think the question comes down to how much prep time do each of these characters has. Because if it's Oppenheimer is literally nuclear exploding Barbie, right? I think is the implication.
Yeah. Although I guess it depends where the fight takes place as well.
Right, but I think if it's just spur of the moment, one of you has to kill the other. I think Barbie's taking it out. I think she has enough.
I think she wouldn't understand the rules. I also think that if we're talking at the box office, it's Barbie. If we're talking with the Academy, it's Oppenheimer. So there's a lot of different ways you can spin this. And, if you listen back to our film franchise fights, which was a fun and exciting game AJ sort of half invented, you can see, how much who's on your team and, where you fight can be. But I'd probably... Well, it would also depend if it was before or after the bomb, because if you remember, like, at the start of Oppenheimer, he, like, poisons that apple to give to Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah,
and it's
you're
like,
right.
He has this, like, murderous streak in him, but he ends up taking, just luck of timing. But then if it's after that, when fucking President, it was like Lyndon B. Johnson or whoever called him, like, a pussy, and we don't want that.
Such an approximate summation of what happens in Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
A president, Lyndon B. Johnson or someone, calls him a pussy.
Who is it? Who's the president?
Gary Oldman.
Yeah, it is Gary Oldman. But who is Gary Oldman playing is the question. Unfortunately, the cast.
Lyndon B. Johnson was after
Harry S.
Nixon,
Truman.
though.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Lyndon B. Johnson
No,
is
he's
in the film,
before
though.
Nixon.
Truman was the 33rd.
Lyndon B.
Johnson was the 36th.
Great. Well, I'm giving it to Lyndon B. Johnson. That's who I think will win in this
And I'm
going to
give it to Harry S. Truman.